You are in for an interesting ride.
Hello, and welcome to another ET Newsroom episode. I'm Joanna Summerscales, your host, and I thought it was quite interesting to take a retrospective look, a historical perspective at some of the ET UFO information that came, in this case, via Lord Hugh Dowding. And his interest not only was this gentleman Air Chief Marshal and took us through the Battle of Britain, he was also involved in creating radar. And who knows, maybe it was those things that they couldn't explain seen on those early radar readings that changed his mind from no UFO to, oh, UFOs, and also into spirituality, into that field too. Now, Peter and his wife Elizabeth spent quite a lot of time back in the 1980s doing all kinds of fantastic work in support of the RAF veterans. That included creating a book with all the signatures, well, as many as they could find of those still living, around about 3,000 of those who took part in the Battle of Britain, known famously as the Few. So join me with Peter as we go down memory lane and have a look at those UFO events through the eyes of Lord Hugh Dowding. Enjoy. It was some time after Peter had retired from his main job in the City of London that he joined a small shop locally that sold all kinds of interesting things, from bric-a-brac to antiques and artifacts. And one day, one of his regular customers popped by to show him an interesting thing that he'd found in a second-hand book that he'd just bought. In the jacket, he'd found the handwritten notes for a talk by Air Chief Marshal Lord Hugh Dowding, dated 1957, Southborough. A talk estimated to last about 2.5 hours. To show the importance of this find, Peter made notes from an original copy of the document. Flying Saucers Notes, 7th of August 1957, found tucked in the jacket of the book, marked Dowding, Oak Gate, Southborough, Tunbridge Wells, August 1955. Big subject, 2.5 hours talk. Must pick and choose and tell you of some books. Existence of saucers beyond question, tens of thousands of sightings, photographs in air and on the ground, pursued in the air by fighters. He mentions about Captain Mantell, tracked on radar at 9,000 miles per hour, estimated speeds by fighters. Books, Flying Saucers, certain publications. From Outer Space by Donald Kehoe. All information from Air Force sources. Comparatively little information about people who claim to have made contacts. Not much interest in sightings, much interest in contacts. Few claims. I know details of only about 7, 2 or 3 more. I am trying to get from US, only mention now Adamski, Cedric Allingham, Lobsang Rampa and another. Try the best, anxious for more cases to be examined. I believe them to be extraterrestrial. They are much in advance of what any nation could have at present. Acceleration keeping cool at terrific speeds, noiseless, hovering, light phenomenon. Discount psychics and telepathic yarns? Some true. Findings in this publication will correct that assumption. Government attempts to mislead public. US and their projects, keyhole balloons, our silly meteor explanations. Australian sources seen by thousands. Claims cloaked with reports. BBC reported one hovering, thundering silence. Papers nobbled? Scientists and astronomers don't like things to happen which they can't explain. They ought to be able to explain, so they say these things don't happen. To themselves they portend that they are protecting the public from panic. Intentions of visitors both good and bad. Florida disappearances. Results to humanity. We should fit out an invading force quite apart from space travel. Secret of FS in the sweat of the brow. Limitless power at no cost. Could help us in our energy problems, author's thoughts. Vested interests shaken to the core. Coal, oil, electricity, tremendous importance. Also, what shall we lose? Impact on religion, ethics and morality from contact with the more elevated of our visitors. End. And, as Peter notes, we should not forget that these events were just after the H-bomb had been introduced and used. Hugh Dowding was responsible for getting radar set up prior to the Battle of Britain, and after this was set up, it seems that things were seen on radar that could not be explained. Peter was also informed that prior to 1941, Dowding had no interest in spiritual matters, and those little books he produced were written after his visit to the USA, following his retirement, again having taken the country to victory in the Battle of Britain. And it is thought that he was sent on a special mission to the USA, as it was after the Roswell events, and this must have had something to do with the radar findings. However, just before we hear about the UFO element, let's hear a little bit more about Lord Hugh Dowding with Peter and Elizabeth. Tell us about that.
Well, the post office issued a stamp and they wanted to stick Lord Dowding on the 35 pence stamp, which was overseas. And we said, well, hang on a minute. Nobody overseas is going to know who he is. He really is so important. He should be on the first class stamp for Great Britain. So we put him on a 17p one for everyday postage in the United Kingdom. And those pilots that attended this post office exhibition and unveiling of the memorial in the Cowley grounds, which is one of the national memorials in the country, a memorial to him in the Battle of Britain Memorial at Cape Fern. The problem was that he was part of the inauguration of radar before the Battle of Britain. It was designed to pick up German aircraft. So apart from the fact of him splitting up the Air Force into certain sections around the country, what people don't realise is that the Germans had a lot of drop tanks in France, hundreds and hundreds of them, that they could sling under a 109. Aircraft could in fact fly into the United Kingdom, drop their tanks and attack us from around the back and the side, and not necessarily directly over the channel. So therefore his thinking was that they would disperse his fighters around the country, and he didn't want any more fighters to go to France because he knew that he had a restricted number. He knew the Germans had hundreds of 109s and many hundreds of Heinkels and 110s and all sorts of other aircraft. They did attack us. It wasn't until later on that the big wing, bringing everybody together, did pay off because it was overwhelming numbers. But at the beginning, whilst we had to build up stocks and pilots and things like that, because they were running dry, they were getting pilots off Coastal Command and off air training and volunteers. I suppose Churchill's secretary said, what do you think the situation is? He said, well, I know when we really haven't got the Germans marching up Whitehall, because basically if we don't win this, they will be walking up Whitehall. However, people do forget that the channel is very unpredictable weather-wise. We found that out with D-Day. It was touch and go for D-Day, but it would have been just the same for the Germans coming over here, and they didn't have the sophistication of the craft that we had for D-Day. And there were various arms dumps around the country where secret groups have access, So it wouldn't have been an easy ride for him at all. He basically retired.
Let's hear something about the UFO story.
Yes, this is what this all leads up to. So basically I was in art and painting and things like that. So I had a good knowledge of colour, and I found that brushes, when I was using certain colours, the brushes would bend and break. The metal and the wood would bend. And particularly with oranges and pale primrose yellows and that sort of coloration, it's very, very strange. Anyway, talking to Lady Dowding, she said, well, he noticed on radar when that was instigated that these things were spotted going over 10,000 miles an hour. And the pilots were seeing these little orbs, globes, flying around, or spheres. So he must have known a little bit more than he ever said about this, but he realised that this was not human, not earthly or anything like this, was elsewhere. And now we had the evidence through radar that these things would be picked up and possibly seen at the same time.
And sort of what year are we talking about?
1939, around Folkestone, East Anglia, these radar stations were set up all the way around the Kent coast. And the thing is that the Germans tried to knock them out. But as I said, the radar operators were seeing these things, and that got him interested in this. And then he found that people were seeing things sort of like a hologram of the person. And I can actually say that this has happened to me, because my great friend, who we did all this charity modelling work with, Peter, he died. Although I knew a lot about him, I didn't know certain facts. And after my retirement, I worked in this little antique collector's shop. And one day, this person walked into the shop that was a spitting image of him wearing a gabardine raincoat, and he looked right through me and he said, "Do I have any old cameras?" So I said, "Well, I've only got this Brownie box camera, but to be quite frank, you need to go to the camera shop in the Pantiles." I said, "Well, they have a lot of old camera hand thing." And he said, "Oh, thank you very much indeed." And he stared through me and then walked out of the shop and went. And this stuck in my mind, and I said to Tella, his late wife now, I said, "Tella, did Peter wear a gabardine raincoat with a belt round it?" "Oh yes, he always wore that." And I said, "Was he interested in old cameras?" He said, "Oh, extremely interested in the old cameras, the bellows cameras and things like that." I said, "Well, he's walked in the shop." And she said, "Well, I wish he'd come round and see me." This does happen. It's extraordinary. But then dealing in the sort of things that I'm dealing in now, because the art then quietened down as time moved on, it just went quiet. And then one day I met a person called Alan Hayday, because I was doing family history research. I wanted to know why I was possibly able to do this colour work.
As a talented artist, Peter painted a lot of RAF craft and scenes, and it was through his interest in art and colour that took him down another path, another route that led him into the awareness that there were other things at play, other senses and other awarenesses that were beginning to filter in, related to colour, related to frequency, related to his ability to somehow capture and anchor this work and focus it via the dowsing and the coding that he now uses. This is some of his beautiful artwork that he did for the RAF. So I wanted Peter to share with you a little bit about a project that he was instrumental in bringing together, which is a book, and it's called Their Finest Hour, The Battle of Britain. And Peter did extensive work in the 1980s, bringing all together the people who had fought in the Battle of Britain. And the reason we're mentioning this is also because Lord Hugh Dowding was involved in that, and there is a UFO connection. But we're just going to talk about this book for a minute.
We've got a memorial book. I have to explain how this started. My wife and I, we were involved in charity work for the Royal Air Force Association and British Legion over many years in Tunbridge Wells. We used to dress up windows for the Battle of Britain to raise money for Wings, British Legion and things like that. And we used to do Building Society windows, and we used to do the dioramas. We went up to the Hendon Museum to have a look, and I noticed some mirrors that had signatures on of a few. I thought, well, the only thing that a person can leave is either a personal letter or their signature, which is them. So it would be nice to see who's still around. With the contacts I had, I was put in touch with the then Secretary of the Battle of Britain Fighter Association, Pat Hancock, and I said, I'd like to try and find out how many are surviving out of this near 3,000. Because the figure was a little bit fluid. There were certain criteria to belong to, as one of the few, to have that class. He said, well, I'll give you a list of our members, and he said, by the way, we've got about 60 plus members that we've just lost contact with. We don't know whether they're alive or dead, and they're all over the world. I thought, oh, that's a challenge. I'll have a go at that, and this might help me to do exhibitions and things like that. Painting pictures, yes, and things like that. And first of all, I thought, well, let's try and do a book of evidence of contact. I got a pile of envelopes, and I had little slips printed, and we went through the telephone books. First of all, we contacted all the known members of the Fighter Association who agreed to sign a slip to say, that's me. I thought, right, I'll saved these as evidence, fixed them in a book called Fight for the Sky, because they had very wide margins. And these are some of the pages out of that book, because they had fly pictures at the back, and then listed them all out as we went. So here's one of the pages here. George Darley, various people, Sir John Grandy up here, Derek Dowding, who was Dowding's son, and got all these slips in gradually. And then, because I worked in London, I had a lunch hour, so I went into the City Business Library, and they had all the telephone books for the world. So I used to pick up so many telephone books and go through and write to anybody with a little slip saying, are you the person we're looking for? And I might have 40 envelopes that would go out, and they'd sign the slip, so I'd then record it and pass the name and address on to the association. And those lost members were traced. They could be in New Zealand, we found them in Canada, Australia, South Africa. Telephone books were actually in the City Business and Reference Library. You could do it then. You can't do it now. I mean, everything's digital. Phone books aren't produced now, and mobile phones, they don't have a phone book, so you couldn't do it now. And gradually, I found just over 1,000, maybe 1,050 or something like that. In this particular edition, I used to update it. These are the pages that they were in the Fight for the Sky book. It would be very nice to reproduce that book with all the signatures in for charity, if the publishers would agree to do it, because it's a record of who was alive after November 1983. They had to be alive on the 1st of November 1983 and on, because quite often, sometimes I've traced them and then sadly they died between that date, so I put a facsimile in, you see, and they would be handwritten, and my daughter did some facsimiles around here. And I also got a selection of signatures of people who actually died before that date. All these here are signatures of people who died before 1983 and during the Battle of Britain themselves in many cases. I was actually encouraged by the late John Holloway, who actually did the light book for the Imperial War Museum, and I contacted him to help him as well. Some of the few felt that they were forgotten, So over time, I gathered all these signatures. Hang on a minute. This would be a wonderful thing if we could just lay all these sheets out. I wonder if we could put them into a book and then do a presentation book on certain anniversaries. So the hardback copies. I photostated the pages out, facsimilitized the signatures out onto sheets like this, referencing the pages that they were in the original book, and then took them down to a printer in Tunbridge Wells and produced these things. It's on a buff paper here, you see. Did a crest for the RAF here, then produced a hardback copy, which we could then present to a person, and I sent one to Buckingham Palace. Tunbridge Wells Borough Council had one. The one was presented to the National Memorial at Capel-le-Fern, and in the end, the original book is handed down for their safe custody and keeping in Capel-le-Fern that can be looked at. They also have a copy which they have of this particular book. Some editions are updated with more in, because when we found a signature of somebody, we would overlay the written so that it would be more original than what it was. In some instances, they weren't able to sign anything. It was a project that was able to be done then and there. And I met a lot of people. I met the late Douglas Bader, and I met the late Wing Commander Stanford Tuck. And there he is, and it's the signature up here. He was one of the leading aces of the Battle of Britain. And we had a chat. Over the years, I built up an enormous amount of books on the subject matter. So when the library, the Memorial, National Memorial, was set up and they were having a reference library, so the books have gone down there to form part of their library, it brought us into a different world. And when we did the stainless steel dishes for Biggin Hill, we raised, I think, nearly £1,000 towards the veterans' costs there with 2 stainless dishes. And we were invited to the officers' mess one Sunday, Peter and I and our wife. And it was something to be experienced, because you had gentlemen in white coats standing behind you. You had silver boxes on the table for cigarettes and things. And you really had to know what to do. And I'm glad that the education I had told us how to hold a knife and fork and how to pull a chair out for a lady, how to sit down and things like that. Something schools don't do these days.
So can we jump forward to how this brought you in contact with UFO chat?
During the work, we realised Lady Dowding lived in the town. Now, I moved into the town in the late 60s. In 1970, Lord Dowding died, and I can remember him being pushed around the town in his bath chair. We got Lady Dowding interested in our work. We did little models of her husband's Spitfire in a case and things like that, and she invited us up for tea. And then I did sort of a fundraising thing. In fact, I can show you the bowl that we had. We had a little raffle in there, and she took a ticket out, and I actually painted this bowl of scenes of the Battle of Britain around on. I got a potter in the Isle of Wight to make a plain bowl with a glazed inside and a glazed bottom and a glazed ring around the top, and leave the middle blank. And I painted 4 scenes of the Battle of Britain around it, and then acrylic varnished them, and it's as good as the day it was done today. And it's just a unique bowl, really, celebrating anniversary of the Battle of Britain. We used to do anniversaries, you see. It was nice to meet people.
Peter's diverse artistic skills include acrylic canvas painting and watercolour, designing objects, merchandise created to be sold in support of his charities of interest, especially the RAF and allied associations such as the Guinea Pig Club. Okay, Peter, got a plate.
An anniversary plate to commemorate the opening of the Kent Battle of Britain Museum down at Hawkinge in 1982. Some of the signatures I had, I invited the pilots to put their name to this, so we got Johnny Johnson, Douglas Bader, Tom Gleave, Stanford Tuck, Paddy Barthrop. So we got those signatures on the artwork. We did the Letraset work round here. We did a pen and ink on here, sent it off to be Letrasetted, and Duro Ray superimposed it on the back. Very weatherproof. So a limited number of those were sold with a certificate to raise money for the museum. And then we did one for a hanger called the Dowding hanger. Sadly, I haven't got one of those. It's a picture of a big hanger across there and some signatures around it.
So Peter, some more of your wonderful artwork.
This was to celebrate the hanger service at Biggin Hill in 1980, to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, when the veterans were there and the Archbishop of Canterbury took the service. And we produced 250, it might have been more, of each of these stainless steel dishes, which raised about £1,000 for the Veterans Reunion. And there's a Hurricane on one and a Spitfire on the other. The original artwork were framed and given to the Biggin Hill. And
Did you do the artwork?
Yeah, oh yes. Yeah. And then it was given to Duro Ray, who then screen printed it onto the stainless steel. So these dishes are around somewhere. I've never seen any in a charity shop yet. They all sold, and we handed a cheque over to them. That was very unique. But sadly, I also did a very big picture of Biggin Hill 1940, showing 1980 of the chapel and the 2 aircraft outside, the gate guards. And they were in the officers' mess. When sadly Biggin Hill was closed down, it was all cleared out. They know where the tapestry went, but they can't find the original artwork for these. So the 2 paintings have disappeared as well. So somebody in their property has got some paintings, should have been belonging to the Royal Air Force, and they should be somewhere. Here's another one. That was an ashtray produced for the Guinea Pig Club. Now that might be a bit perverse, actually producing an ashtray for the Guinea Pig Club, because they were the Burns, Archibald McIndoe.
The Guinea Pig Club was established in 1941. It was a social club and mutual support network for British and Allied aircrew injured during World War II. Its membership was made up of patients of Archibald McIndoe in Ward 3 at Queen Victoria Hospital East, Grinstead, Sussex, who had undergone experimental reconstructive plastic surgery, including facial reconstruction, generally after receiving burns injuries in aircraft. So-called guinea pig because guinea pigs were the ones often used in experiments.
At East Grinstead Hospital, they had the Guinea Pig Club for the survivors. Prince Philip was the president.
And now, back to things relating to the UFO question. So, Peter, you were just talking about Lord Dowding being aware, and I don't know if he ever witnessed himself these unusual blips going 10,000 miles an hour.
They were researched, They were craft of some sort. And Churchill also knew that. But Churchill not publicly so much in his first administration. After we won the war, he was elected out. But then he was reinstated in another election, and Dowding was called in and sent to America on a press card to investigate the White Sands mysteries of UFO connections. And the thing is that a man came into the shop and said, "You might be interested in this," because he knew about my work. He said, "I bought a book from Hall's bookshop that a lot of books went to when Lady Dowding died and her library was sold off. And I found this paper inside the dust jacket of a UFO related book, and it was Dowding's notes dated 1957 for a talk on the subject, because he quite plainly states that they existed, they were picked up on radar, and the fact is we can't say too much about it because the effect of acknowledging this in the fact of religion, money, and the way we live would be completely turned on our heads. We are not alone. And of course, whether this ruffled a few feathers, I don't know, but he's definitely involved in that. And he had a little UFO club in the town. The late Patrick Moore, astronomer, was one of the people who used to attend. He must have known a lot more than...
Thanks, Peter. That's absolutely great and fascinating that
can
Churchill and Lord Dowding knew.
But it's very strange. Dowding lived at Southborough for a period of time, and then he bought the property number 1 Calverley Park. Now this is a memorial to Lord Dowding, made of Scottish granite and a bronze plaque. Lord Dowding was officer commanding in chief the Battle of Britain. We all know as the few, the pilots who fought the Luftwaffe to defend our country during World War II. One of 3 memorials, one in Moffat where he was born, St Clement's Dane, which is a statue, and this particular memorial here. Dowding lived at the corner of number 1 Calverley Park, which is just the other side of this park. He was a great friend of the late Sir Patrick Moore, who used to visit him here, and he had a UFO group. So he realised there were things radar was picking up, hadn't been seen before in any other way like that, and that they were not from this part of the world. So he had an interest in this, which is also very interesting in relation to the other parts of this park that have other secrets, which we're also researching. And that's where we find the UFO matters buried deep in the ground and the mound. And so one wonders whether there was a lot more knowledge as a UFO related area.
Right, Peter, so we're looking at a model.
A Hornby model of a Battle of Britain class steam locomotive on Southern Region. I decided to convert an old Hornby model. I painted up the loco and lined it to show the Dowding crest and nameplate. Later on, these locos were de-streamlined and made rebuilt and ran around the Southern Region for a bit until they were all scrapped. And it runs, and it makes steam as well, it makes smoke.
That's lovely. Well, thanks for that. Amazing. Well, thank you for that and the insights into Battle of Britain, all that wonderful work you've done, and the insights into Lord Dowding and his interest in UFOs. Peter Vincent, once again, thank you. Uh-oh. You see, just when you think you finish recording Peter Vincent, he comes down with this. And look at this, folks. This is a ton of work. Believe it or not, this is research, and it just goes on and on and on.
Right, well, I followed the craft back. At the end of the 3 times a year, they would allow you to follow the craft back because you have a century code to follow the craft.
Coming in on the 18th of the month of March, of August and November, and they all come in at what, 1800 hours GMT?
Yes, that's right, 1800 hours. They're on station, they do their changes 1800 hours, and then on the 18th day of the month they go at 1800 hours. You follow them, and basically they travel across the universe towards what is a variable moving type of black hole, which the Milky Way is coming out, and all that matter's coming through here. Now, this is moving up and down and left and right. So what happens is you get a reflection of the light coming back. And I was told about this because this is the edge of the known star chart. And I was told about this and I said, oh, well, that's because the light reflects from the black hole when you're going in and you're picking up the reflection of the light. So gradually it goes in slower through there, and it takes 8 hours to go through this hole, and then it shoots out into another section of the universe, which of course Hubble and then these other telescopes will see. It'll see right through that. So they'll be looking at an enormous black hole. thinking it's a black hole, but it isn't a black hole. It's an air timer tube, which traffic is coming through that way, going through that way, and it's because it's a 5-pole motor. That's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 sections of the universe, 5-pole motor, generating dark energy, what we call electricity. When you have a model, it has a 5-pole motor in it. Turn the electricity on, the motor turns around and it generates the energy to turn the model's working wheels, you see? A bicycle, you pedal on the bicycle and you've got a dynamo and you're generating electricity by moving your feet. Well, that's exactly what's happening in the universe. This is magnetically gripped by that, so that's your grip, but you haven't got a grip elsewhere. When this gets too close to that, when all the matter from here has finally come into here, this will then expand, that will close, and it'll blow a hole like that, either there, or there. And you say, well, what is beyond that? Well, I found that you've got this 5-pole universe thing, but there's a string type of situation where basically there is nothing. After that section of the universe, you've got something called black area to scale to universe. You've got different zones, basically. This is a bit black, a bit white, universe 699/2, so that in other words is year 6499989. So black and white will pick this up and you'll get a void, then you'll get something like this, and then you get a void and something like that, rather like rings and a tree. So as I pull this over, it just goes on and on and on like that. There doesn't seem to be another universe. And it's like a glass void. I mean, we might actually all be in a giant sphere ourselves, a glass tank, basically on this basis. What has to be studied is that whilst we've got a dimension here, maybe this is in another dimension, and that's something that will have to be examined, but I need a tennis court to lay it out on.
And now tea.
Fin.
Yeah.
Hey.
With the feet up.
Yes. Thanks for the tea, Elizabeth.